Hello everyone, welcome back to another Night Guys Gaming video. I'm coming into a video on something that's been requested by quite a few in the comments. And so I'm excited to show you some lists and kind of break those down. So we'll be continuing our deep dive into the Seer Council, looking at some lists that have been successful and have a history of success, as well as a few lists of my own, showing a few different ideas that hopefully will catch your attention and help you with the foundation of building a Seer Council list that fits your own playstyle. These are the list examples that I'm going to be covering. They are competitive focused. These lists are ones that I believe will help players to succeed in tournaments, whether it be local and even into some GTs. These aren't built for themes necessarily or a casual play, even though you could take them to a casual play. They are really focused to be a meta list, or at least the start of one, and my plan is to help people kind of develop their own list based on a foundation between some of these different options. Proxy Hammer did an interview with Tim Lowe's and talked about the list that he took to a tournament, to a GT, and had good success. Only lost one game, and it was by like a point. And throughout the conversation, I tried my best to get his list and kind of some of his ideas and put that into this video. But I don't know if he's kind of updated that list since then, but this is the most current one that I could find. And following that, we have James Kelling's example of the list that he took to a GT and won that GT. And at least went 5-0 as far as I understand. And he talked with Craftworld Eldar, or Brent as some know, and when they were going through that interview, I wrote down his list and tried to get a good understanding of his ideas on Seer Council lists as well. And just to make sure it's clear, these are not my lists. They are ones as close as I could get from the players that made them, and I wanted to include them as lists that have proven success at some GTs and just kind of get into them a little bit, see what the list is doing, try to give some of my ideas on it. And again, these are my ideas, so take this with a grain of salt. I have not consulted with the players who came up with the list, so I could definitely be missing some of their ideas with these lists, but I wanted to include them so you could see them, and then also just give a little bit of commentary from the way I see it. But my playstyle could be very different from yours and is probably very different from theirs. And so make sure that you understand that this is just an interpretation. This is not some very specific and true researched idea on these lists. I just want to make sure that that's clear. So the following list after that are going to be lists that I did make, that I wanted to bring some ideas for those that have different types of things they may be looking for to try to help different kinds of players find a list that they're comfortable with. So the first one after that would be the MSU list, or minimum size units. And that's going to involve having a bunch of small units. And I think is kind of how a lot of Eldar players played in the index. And so maybe this will be something comfortable for you to come over to from the index. After that, I created a list that's kind of built around a Wraithlord Anchor. And so it's going to have some Wraithlords as kind of a focus and a standout, and then some supporting units to go along with them. And last, I have a balanced list that is closer to what I tend to play and what I feel is kind of one of the more balanced lists as far as being able to take all comers. Now, it is definitely not balanced as far as having infantry and mounted and vehicles, but I think you'll see with all these lists that they're all going to be infantry skewed because of the Seer Council detachment. Between needing psychers and all the stratagems working on infantry, most all the units are going to be infantry, and that's just the best way to build it. So we'll be talking about all those things going forward. Now, what to look for. This is something I want you to pay attention to as we go through these lists. Pay attention to the number of units that each list has, and as a general rule of thumb, you're going to want at least 13 to 15 is a good number to make sure you're kind of shooting for, so that you're not having too few units to where you can kind of get outplayed during the deployment. And if you get much higher than that, you're probably looking at a more wide army that may not have some of the leaders or utility that a list that kind of stays in that 13 to 15 range would have. We'll also see again that these are going to be infantry focused. We want to look and see what their mixture of damage and utility capability is. Are they capable of taking on different profiles? Can you take on horde armies? Can you take on tanks, custodes? We want to look and make sure that the list is capable of taking on any faction, regardless of what they bring to the table and how they can handle those types of units. And then we'll be making a quick consideration for how they do with scoring, both primary and secondary, and how the units selected work with the detachment and the synergy between the detachment, but also even synergy just between the units. And then last, kind of just general strengths and weaknesses from the way I see it. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at with these lists. So starting with Tim Lowe's list, we have Baharoth, Eldrad, Fuegan, Draenzar, Lycus, an Autarch, a Warlock with Lucid Eye to get the enhancement in, and then the Storm Guardians going with Eldrad, the Dark Reapers with the Autarch, 10 Fire Dragons with Fuegan, 5 Howling Banshees with Draenzar, 2 sets of Rangers, Striking Scorpions, Swooping Hawks, 5 Warp Spiders with Lycus, 3 Warlock Skyrunners, all separate, and one of those will be leading a unit of 6 Wind Riders. And so that is the last list that I was able to see from Tim. And if we look at the breakdown here, we have 17 different profiles, and after you attach all the leaders, you're looking at 13 units as it would generally be taken. Now, you can break those apart. Obviously, you could have Eldrad go on his own and leave the Storm Guardians to be on their own, but I think generally it's going to be played where the leaders are going to be going with their respective units. And so we have here infantry and mounted only. There's no vehicles and no monsters. So this is purely infantry and mounted, and most of everything has synergy with the detachment. When we look at how it scores, well, we have the Rangers, we have Striking Scorpions, we have Swooping Hawks with Baharoth. I think this is very good at scoring secondaries. It's going to be very, very strong with a scoring standpoint. As far as the synergy with the detachment and the units, I mean, pretty much every unit has synergy with the detachment, except for the Wind Riders are the main focus of units that I would say that just don't purely synergize. Doesn't mean it doesn't synergize with the list. I'm just saying as far as the detachment itself, we can't use stratagems on the Wind Riders, and the Warlock Skyrunners are still synergistic because they are psychers, and so they do provide aura. But the Wind Riders truly don't have the ability to take any buffs from this detachment, and they also can't give any out. Although they can be led by that Warlock Skyrunner, who will, it still stands that the Wind Riders themselves don't have a detachment synergy with Seer Council specifically. But since you are taking Warlock Skyrunners, I think you can see that there could be value if we're going to be taking a Skyrunner anyways. Why not put it with some Wind Riders to give them ignore cover? And so continuing on to the other synergies, I think with this list and listening to Tim kind of talk about how he played through his games, I feel like him and I have a little bit of a same idea with what we're trying to accomplish in one sense with the list. And it's hyper mobility, but not just mobility, but really the ability to focus firepower in specific places on the board to make sure we can clear it out or get the appropriate firepower where we want it when we need it. If you look at his list, Baharoth and the Hawks can come up and then come back down where you need them. The Fuegan with the Fire Dragons could be Unshrouded Truth. You have the Dark Reapers with Autarch that can get 18-inch Lone Op or Unshrouded Truth as well, but they have very long range, so they can be shooting where they need to. You have Draenzar giving the Howling Banshees extreme mobility and consistent mobility, so they are able to get that guaranteed 6-inch advance. You have the Lycus and Warp Spiders, who can flicker jump 26 inches and still shoot and charge. And you have the Wind Riders that have an innate 14-inch move. So you're looking at basically everything being extremely fast and capable of completely switching which front you're fighting on or which objective that you're focusing. And it makes it very difficult for your opponent to respond in kind. And so if you see that he's weak somewhere, you can pretty much take everything, put it on that flank, wipe that flank out, and then control that whole side of the board. As your opponent starts to try to move, you then can completely switch angles that you're coming at him from and fight him in a way that you want to fight to try to keep as many of your units safe as possible while taking out his. And in a nutshell, I think that is what makes Seer Council so good. And I think if you are building a list that will utilize the capability for Seer Council to do that, I think you'll have some good success. And I think Tim's list here really has an emphasis on that. And I think you can see that when you look at the overall list and how it synergizes with itself more so than the detachment per se. But the other kind of synergies that we see here, we can see that Lycus is going to be able to give crit hit on 5 for the Wind Riders, which is nice. And so being able to get them to have lethal hits on 5-ups, it's never a bad thing. Is it something that's going to happen often? Not necessarily, but it is one of those synergies that you can make happen if you're shooting the Wind Riders, for example, into some Terminators or something, or into something very tough that the Wind Riders aren't necessarily going to wound very well. You can get those lethals on 5s to really just increase the amount of wounds that you're handing over to your opponent, regardless of the toughness of the target. So just keep that in mind if this is something that interests you. I would imagine that the Wind Riders are probably coming out of reserves, and that way they're a bit safe and just a threat that the opponent always has to have concern for in the back of their head. And so if we look at the strengths, and I've kind of already talked about them a little bit here, but there's a lot of utility. You have a lot of Phoenix Lords, which bring all sorts of different utility. Fuegan gives you that range on your Melta weapons. Baharoth's got the up and down. Lycus allows you to go so fast and far and still charge to get even more distance to attack the opponent's home objective, for example. And Janzar gives you some nice flexibility as far as the mobility for the Howling Banshees, but also her ability to really cut down character units. And so you have some utility, and then you have the speed and focus, as I mentioned before. Now, I could go on with talking about each one of these lists in a lot of detail, but I don't want to spend too terribly much time on any one list. So I'm going to kind of stay there as far as the strengths and synergies, but looking at some of the weaknesses, and I want to make this clear as well. When I'm talking about weaknesses, I want to talk about some weaknesses of every list, and I'm trying to point out some things that if you play a list like this, you need to make a plan for these things. It's not necessarily that the list is weak or this makes the list weak, but these are things that if you play, make sure that when you look at what's across the table from you, you're coming up with a plan. And the first one of those is indirect. So we have a few weaknesses and units that are going to be vulnerable to indirect. We have the Warlock with Lucid Eye. If he's not in the Storm Guardian squad and he's on his own, he's going to be a viable target for indirect to be able to just pop. He's very easy to kill with indirect, almost any indirect in the game. And yes, we can do our lone op 18, but just know that it's something that you might be forced to do, especially if your opponent draws Assassinate early, and you'll have to end up keeping him safe. But unfortunately, that's going to then allow him to maybe pop some of your other important units, like your Dark Reapers, or the Warp Spiders, or Fire Dragons, or Wind Riders. And the Wind Riders in particular are extremely vulnerable. We do not have a way to lone op 18 them. We don't have a way to really get them better saves. Now they're saving on 4s. It's almost just like 6 Space Marines that you spent 160 points on. And I see that Wind Riders can come down out of reserves and get a lot of value, but in my experience, they often don't get 160 points of value from just one round of shooting. And so just be very careful and cognizant of what your opponent has and is able to do, because those Wind Riders can get cut down quick, because they're basically not even really Space Marine bodies, almost like Space Marine scouts, because they have 4-up saves, they only have a 6-up invuln, and they don't really have a great way of being protected. So if they can be shot, they're going to kind of just fall quick. And most everybody brings some weapons that are efficient into Space Marine bodies. Anything that's good into Space Marine is going to be really good into Wind Riders, so just be very careful with the Wind Riders and make sure you're paying attention to the opponent's indirect. Now, the other thing is that we have a lot of bricks here. We've got Eldred's brick, we have Dark Reaper brick, we have Fire Dragon brick, and we do need to make sure we're planning what we're doing with Unshrouded Truth, because we want to make sure that we're planning ahead. And if you need Eldrad's Doom, well, you may need to Unshrouded Truth him. Or if you need all those Dark Reapers to be moving, we can do it for free, sure, but you might also want those Fire Dragons Unshrouded Truths as well. And sometimes, even though you have the efficiency of having a brick of 10, and this stratagem will affect all 10 models, as opposed to only 5, you are causing yourself to really need those brick to be effective and be where they need to be. And like Dark Reapers, for example, are very slow. And so if they are not placed in the right spot, or the line that they're holding doesn't really have a target that they want, you need to Unshrouded Truth them, but you might also need the Fire Dragons to go blow up a tank. And so you just need to make sure that you're prepared with a plan, because you're going to have a few different units that are vying for that Unshrouded Truth. And your secondaries are probably going to be some things that are going to kind of dictate who actually gets it. But just make sure you're keeping that in mind. And then lastly, the kind of along the same lines in one sense, is just overcommitment. Anytime you have big bricks like 10 Fire Dragons with Fuegan, you're talking, well over 300 points. Just make sure that when you send that unit in, you're getting value, and you're getting so much killed in that space that your opponent's not going to be able to take out that unit. For example, don't send in your Fire Dragons to kill one Predator tank. That's just not going to be a good trade. You're 300 some points to his 100 and I don't know what they are, 160, I'm not sure, 140, 160, somewhere in that range. And you don't want to trade down like that. And the bricks kind of cause that to be something that you just have to pay attention to. Now, sometimes you can drop that brick and you can easily get all your points, and you can split fire, and you can shoot multiple tanks, and you can shoot Fuegan into one thing with a couple Fire Dragons and shoot the Exarch into something else. And between the tokens and everything, you can get value. But you just have to make sure that you're not dropping that giant brick just to get killed after they only killed 160 points of your opponent's army. It's a really bad way to make a decision and then start falling behind on that trading game, because we want to be good at our trades. And so again, it's not that this is an innate weakness, because those bricks have value. It's just something that I want to caution the general player base, that you need to make sure you're being very careful with these big bricks, where you're Unshrouded Truthing them, making sure you're not getting them to where you're just going to get immediately killed on your opponent's next turn. So just keep that in mind. All right, and the next list is James Kelling's list that he, again, was talking with Craftworld Eldar's channel, and this is what he said he had taken. He had Baharoth, Eldrad Fuegan, Malgan Ra, the Autarch, Farseer with Lucid Eye, Storm Guardians, Guardian Defenders, 5 Dark Reapers, 5 Fire Dragons, 5 Howling Banshees, 5 Swooping Hawks, 5 Warp Spiders, 2 sets of Warlock Conclave with 4 in each, 3 Vibro Cannons, 2 Warlock Skyrunners, a Warwalker, and a Wave Serpent. And I have to say, the Vibro Cannon include is awesome. it's really funny to me. And I even had people mentioning, hey, someone took some units that you put in the D tier of your list, tier list, and still made it work. And if anything, that goes to show you a couple of things, that you can take a list with enough skill and do a lot of good work, but also tier lists have to always be taken with a grain of salt. A lot of the units in, well, really any faction and codex, but any unit when used with a plan can do some work. Because if you look at what vibro cannons do, their damage output is absolutely terrible for their cost. Even though they're only 60 points, the damage they do is very, very low. But if you listen to what James Kelling was talking about, the way he was using them, he had a plan for them, and he used them in a certain way that worked with his list and what he was trying to do. And I think you could probably find some other units to have similar results with, and I think he could have changed some things and still done very well because he's just that good of a player. But I really want to point out that you can take a lot of different units, and if your plan is good and your strategy is set, you can make these things work. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. It was a very interesting list, and I enjoyed hearing his thoughts on Seer Council. And if we look at it, we have 18 different profiles and 13 units between everything once you put the leaders with the units. And from my understanding, the Autarch was going with the Howling Banshees. And so, you have Baharoth with Hawks, you got Fuegan with Fire Dragons, Magan with Dark Reapers, of course, and the Farseer with the Guardian Defenders, and Eldrad with the Storm Guardians. Now, this is now an infantry and mounted, but also included a few vehicles. We have a Warwalker and a Wave Serpent. So now we have a few things that, again, aren't really synergizing with the detachment role, but that's okay. The idea is that it synergizes as a list. But we have good scoring. We have, the Warlock Skyrunners that can help score. The Warwalkers got Scout. We have the Hawks with Baharoth, and we have some Warp Spiders, and the Warp Spiders don't have anybody with them, so they don't have Lycus. So without Lycus, they're not as expensive. We can use them to do some secondaries and also move blocking, all those kind of things. So yeah, I think the scoring is good. I don't think it's quite as like the secondary isn't quite as focused as Tim's list, but I think between all those things, and then also the vibro cannons, because again, the vibro cannons damage is very low and not really a big part of the damage of the list, and so you can use those to also do some of the secondaries, and they will do just fine. And they're 60 points, and you're missing out on a very little amount of damage. So scoring is good, and it is still pretty strong, but I think if I had to pick between the two, I think Tim had just a little bit more scoring units built into his list. And so that's just something, again, you have to kind of consider with your style of play and how many you think that you need to make the list work for yourself. But when we look at some of this synergy with the detachment, the vibro cannons, just to be clear, they are infantry, so we can use our stratagems on them. And this is an interesting idea to basically create some problems for your opponent. So when you take the Farseer and you attach her to the Guardian Defenders specifically with 4 Warlock Conclave, and then you add the platform, the Vibro Cannon, that creates a unit that does qualify for Call the Horde, because if you take the 12 wounds from the Guardian Defender block, which includes the platform, so you have 12 wounds there. You've got 8 wounds coming from the Warlock Conclave, and you have 5 coming from the Vibro Cannon. And so that puts you at 25, because you can't count the Farseers. You can only count non-leader units. And so we're at 25 for Call the Horde. Now you've created a situation where your opponent can't just discard Call the Horde. And so there's a little bit of denial happening there. We also have a couple of vehicles, so they can't just ignore bring it down. And so we can already see a few of the differences, it looks like, in ideas to me between Tim Lowe's and James Kelling, where James Kelling is looking at some denial, whereas Tim seemed to be focused on probably more a big alpha strike and taking more out and really scoring himself as opposed to just thinking about denying the opponent as much. And I don't want to say one's better than the other, but I just want to point these things out. So again, you can kind of get some ideas when you're building your list of some ways that maybe you want to build it with some denial in there. Maybe it doesn't matter to you. But again, just pointing these things out. So we have a lot of synergy with our units here. And I want to look at this as one of the strengths and also kind of a weakness. It's kind of a strength and a weakness here. But when you look at the synergy between what you can do with the combinations that are built into this list. So you have a farce here that's +1 to hit, which is going to help a lot of different things in this list. Excuse me. The Dark Reapers absolutely love +1 to hit. The Fire Dragons also really like it. A lot of people don't think about how Fire Dragons that aren't shooting into vehicles and monsters actually do like that +1 to hit to get a little bit more consistency with their single shots. The Swooping Hawks don't hate it. The whole Guardian Defender block really likes +1 to hit, which is going to be pretty much always happening with the Farseer leading it. The Warwalker is going to like that. And the Wave Serpent is going to like it as well, because the Wave Serpent has twin linked on its Sprite Lands, but you really want to add to that hit roll to really make sure that you get the hit in, and then you'll get to your reroll with the twin linked on the Bright Lands. So that +1 to hit is super beneficial for a lot of different units. And then we see the Warwalker coming in to give us some extra AP. And so we can already ignore cover with a stratagem with our infantry. And so the Warwalker is going to add AP to a lot of the different units that will really like to get AP. For example, Baharoth and the Hawks will like extra AP. The Warlock Conclave will like extra AP. And pretty much the whole Guardian bricks all do better with some extra AP. You have the Warp Spiders. And so this helps us get into some of those targets between the extra AP and Doom from Eldrad. Now, our units that aren't necessarily built to take on tough, difficult units are going to be doing a much better job, even when you consider things like Guardians. I mean, the Guardian Shuriken catapults, if you give them +1 to hit, now they're hitting on 2s. You give them +1 to wound, now they're wounding everything at least on 5s. And then you give them some extra AP, make them ignore cover, give them another AP when they roll 6s. And now you're looking at things that are shooting, wounding everything on 5s, starting at 2 AP, but getting 3 on a few of those shots. Pretty much everything in the game is not going to want to be shot by this combination. And again, it's not that you have to have every piece of that in there, but when you just look at all the possible combinations between all those units, there's a lot of units helping each other out. And not to mention, obviously, the Vibro Cannons. So they're also going to like that +1 to hit. And that's going to be huge for the Vibro Cannons because they're already unreliable when it comes to damage. So that +1 to hit is going to really increase the reliability. And especially if you're able to shoot all 3 into the same target, you really want that third Vibro Cannon hitting on 2s and making sure that you're getting as much value out of that focus fire as you can. And so with all that together, we can see that James put together a very combination oriented list here. And so if you like that kind of play where you're able to bring a lot of things to bear to make units do what they normally couldn't on their own, this list has a lot of that built in. And of course we have some considerations for indirect, because indirect is just in general kind of a difficult thing to deal with when you have an infantry focused Eldar army. So he has a Wave Serpent to help protect some units. You can put a lot of things in reserves and strat reserves. And so now we have a bit of protection. The Vibro Cannons themselves are also a little tougher, a little more difficult to kill than your standard Aspect Warriors. So you're trading off the damage of Aspect Warriors for a tougher unit that, can still screen and do missions. And so we have a lot of ability to deny our opponents and then also screen the board with these individual vibro cannons with Baharoth and Hawks coming down, maybe in our deployment zone when we need them to in turn 3, just to kind of screen everything while our opponent runs out of time to send in the deep strikes. There's all these kind of ideas coming together here. And so there's a great screening and point denial. And then he also, with the double brick, I think the double brick is a fantastic and strong way to play Seer Council. So I really like that he brought the Farseer with the Guardian Defenders and Warlock Conclave, and Eldrad with the Storm Guardians and Warlock Conclave. I think that was great. So now switching gears, looking at some weaknesses. I think the most glaring one to me that I would have difficulty in some matchups with this list for myself would just be the lack of infiltrators. And I think with some of the different armies out there that are have some amazing units that can scout and they just want to get in our face very quickly, having at least one infiltrator, even just one unit of rangers, can really help, stem the tide, hold back the opponent for just a little bit and let us get a little bit of breathing room so that we can, not get rushed so hard in turn 1. And so that would be something I would recommend as you look at maybe using this list as a foundation. Maybe consider getting at least a ranger squad in there just to have an infiltrator. There is some inefficient damaged units, and so this is kind of where you have to consider, are you more interested in creating combinations or just being a little more efficient in damage? And so, for example, we have the Warwalker. The Warwalker gives us some great combination with certain units, but the Warwalker itself is pretty abysmal when it comes to damage, same as like the Vibro Cannons. They are very abysmal when it comes to damage, but you just have to know what you're wanting and expecting from these units. The Vibro Cannons, I don't believe James was really leaning on for great damage. I think the utility of having more units, because he was just able to get to 13 with those thrown in there, but the utility of having more units and creating a Call the Horde unit, and just being able to screen 9 inches from those individual models, and you have a couple of them, and just bringing them easily on the, from strat reserves, being able to shoot down the sides. There's reasons, but you still have to consider they don't do much damage. And so how is your playstyle? Are you a good player who can use units for some of their durability and their utility? Or do you need to switch some things out and get some more efficient damage in there? And in another video in the future, I'm going to be going into some of the math behind some of these units. So let me know what some of the units you want me to kind of focus on when I do that video next, because that is something I want to show why there's particular units that I really like in Seer Council. And I think with Seer Council having very few buffs to our units, we pretty much have an ignore cover and a little extra AP on crit wounds buff. And that's really our only damage buff, and we can't even apply it to everything, and it doesn't really help, our warp spiders much and our dark reapers. So we have to be very thoughtful in our damage dealers. And lastly, as much as it's a strength to have synergistic units that can combine and combo together and do a lot more than, in a sense, they're the sum of the parts. If you lose some of those units that you need to create those combos, you can start to have some difficulties. So if that Warwalker goes down, if the Farseer brick gets taken out and you lose the +1 to hit, if any of these combo parts or puzzle pieces, I guess, in a sense, like if you lose one of the pieces of the puzzle, then you just can't put it together. And I don't think that just losing the Warwalker suddenly makes everything fall apart. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that, but it is part of creating a combo list, is that if you lose some of your combo, you're going to lose some of your synergy. Obviously, that's just built in. And so that is something that you just need to be aware of and try to stay focused on getting accomplished what you need to get accomplished with your combos before your opponent's able to take out too many of those pieces, I guess, is in a sense what I want to just caution those that are building a list kind of based on this foundation. So I hope that that was enough on this list. There's a lot that we could go into every single one of those lists in a whole lot of detail, but I really wanted to just get some lists out there, give some quick reviews on them, some breakdowns, and spend 10-15 minutes on these and get them out to you guys so you can start building your own list. So let me know if this format works, or if you guys would like me to do something a little different with these kind of list reviews as we move forward. And I'm planning on doing some of the other detachments in the future as well. So just let me know your thoughts on if this is kind of what you were hoping for, or if you just want list with less review, or if you want more depth in each individual list. Just let me know what you guys want. I'd appreciate it. And the next list is an MSU, or minimum size units list. And so this list is going to be a lot different than the previous ones. So let's check it out. We got Eldrad and Fuegan as our 2 leaders. And then we have Storm Guardians to go with Eldrad. And then 2 sets of 5 Corsair Void Reavers, 3x5 Dark Reapers, 3x5 Fire Dragons, 3x5 Howling Banshees, 5 Rangers, 5 Striking Scorpions, 3x5 Warp Spiders, 4 Conclave to go with the Storm Guardians and Eldrad, and then 3 Warlock Skyrunners, each separate in their own unit. And so, as you could probably tell just from the rundown, we have a lot of units. So we have 12 different profiles in 20 units. And so this is going to allow you to put a lot of things in reserves and still be able to out-deploy your opponent. We have pure infantry with a bit of mounted with the Warlock Skyrunners, obviously. And I believe that the scoring, as far as like secondaries especially, is going to be very strong with this list. I even think that some of the primary game is decent because we have some more OC units. The Corsair Void Reavers do have 2 OC, and so you can throw those 5 on a point for 10 OC to try to contest your opponent. The synergy here is really that the units synergize with the detachment, but I will say when you look at this, especially compared to the last list, there's much less synergy between the units themselves. And of course we have Eldrad with his Doom for the +1 to wound that could help everybody, but outside of that buff, we really don't have a lot going on when it comes to synergies between the units. But the nice thing is we can use our stratagems on basically every unit outside the Skyrunners, and so we do have synergy with the detachment. And so this is almost a polar opposite look at a list compared to one that really focuses on the synergy of the units over the detachment. And this strength of this list, I think, is the width. And so, and by width, I also want to, I guess, mention like redundancy. So we know that we can go wide, we can get Dark Reapers on both corners of the board, and then also back up another one. We can have a Fire Dragon on the board and some in reserves. We can have Howling Banshees protecting multiple different units. And we have multiple sets of Warp Spiders to be able to do secondaries or attack or move block. And if we lose a unit, we know we have another. If they take out one of our Dark Reapers units, we have 2 more. And so just knowing that even if they take out one of your pieces, you still have some redundancy to deal with the things that those units like to take out. Now, with width, you lose a bit of utility. So we don't have the Phoenix Lords to really push like the mobility or the extra killiness, or like us being able to shove some Warp Spiders into the opponent's back line and really get far back in there. We're losing some of that in exchange for this redundancy. So there's always a give and take. Anytime you make a list, you're always going to have some of that give and take. And so with this list as well, though, because we have so many units, we're going to have a very good amount of screening, and we're going to be able to deny our opponent points in a lot of different ways. We might be able to deny them some secondaries. We are going to be pushing some more on the primaries. And so I think this list is going to play the kind of standard MSU style from the index in one sense. So if you played the MSU style in the index, then this may be a little more comfortable for you. You need to definitely be able to be a good at move blocking and screening when you run a list like this, because you are not going to be able to survive a lot of the hit back from opponents. And so that is one of the weaknesses. We have not only less utility, we don't even have a single enhancement in this list, but we also have less survivability. We don't have a lot of different profiles. So like in James Kelling list, he had the standard Eldar bodies that are toughness 3 and 1 wound for the most part, but then there were some Phoenix Lords that are a bit more difficult to kill because they got the 2 up, 4 up saves. And then he had the Vibro Cannons, which are even tougher yet with 5 wounds. And so you had a bit more efficiency in a Wave Serpent that's even tougher still, -1 to wound when the strength's greater than, and has an invuln save. And so he had some different profiles for the opponent to have to deal with, and we just don't really have that. We just are infantry. This is a very infantry focused and skewed list, and so there is a bit of give and take again with planning a list like this. And another point to make when you have this many units and it's all infantry is it can be kind of difficult to position this list correctly. If you had practice using MSU in the index, I think it'll come a little more naturally, but if you don't, and this is new style for you, it can be a little challenging at first to get used to positioning so many different units and keeping in mind just how squishy Eldar is. Pretty much anything that looks at our units can start doing damage. We have to be very focused on being able to position correctly. And when you have this many units, and if you're on a time limit, that can be a challenge. So just want to point out those kind of weaknesses. But again, I think there is a lot of strengths in just being able to overwhelm an opponent with the number of units we have, and just pushing up that reliability. It does allow us to also trade sometimes a little easier, or it makes it a little harder for our opponent to trade into us as much. If they're not able to kill a Phoenix Lord with the unit, that means they're getting less value when they do kill a unit. And so there's a little give and take there. But on the flip side, sometimes the Phoenix Lords really help push our unit to be able to clear something. So for example, Howling Banshees, yes, they can kill a 5-man squad of Space Marines, but it's not guaranteed. But you put Jane Czar with them and they'll really start ripping through Space Marines. Then you start looking at possibly ripping through 10 Space Marines as opposed to just 5. And you can actually do some serious clear work with Jane Czar attached. But you lose some of that when you go to these MSU units. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Let me know what you think of this list, and as we go through these next few, I'd be interested in see what the general consensus was of people's favorite lists. Like what are you guys looking at here? What is your plan to use as a foundation for your own list and some of the changes you might make? Really curious to see what some of the in the comments out there, what people are looking at. Is your list looking like any of these, or is yours even very different from some of these lists? So I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments, and I would love to read about it. Going on to the next one, the Wraithlord Anchor. So the Wraithlord Anchor has Eldrad Fuegan Lycus, Farseer with Torque of Moray Heg, Spirit Seer, Storm Guardian, Guardian Defender, 5 Dark Reapers, 5 Fire Dragons, 5 Howling Banshees, 5 Rangers, 3 Shroud Runners, 4 Warlock Conclave, 2 Warlock Conclave, 2x5 Warp Spiders, 2 Warlock Skyrunners individual, and then 3 Wraithlords. And so if we break that down, we have 16 different profiles now, but 15 units. So we're still in that 13 to 15 range that we kind of look for. And this time, though, we have infantry with some monster focus. And I think in this list, the scoring is good. Just kind of off the bat, we can score with the Spirit Seer, we can score with the Rangers, we can score with Shroud Runners. Generally, you can look at scoring units as ones that are a bit lower on the damage, and so you're not as concerned about missing out on their damage for that turn. Now, Warp Spiders can also definitely help with scoring secondaries, and then of course our Warlock Skyrunners. And so we do have a decent amount of units, and I think the scoring strength is pretty good. And I would even say it's probably strong overall, because not only are we going to score pretty well in secondaries, we got a lot of Wraithlords to help us with the primary. And that's kind of the focus of this list. So here we have most everything synergizing with a detachment, most everything's infantry, or a psyker, in the case of the Skyrunners, of course. But now we've introduced Wraithlords, and Wraithlords don't synergize with the detachment rule, but they synergize with the units that we're always going to be taking, which are psykers. Wraithlords always want to be near a psyker, and it gives them the +1 ballistic skill, +1 weapon skill. In this case, we're taking a Spirit Seer. Now, I'm only taking a Spirit Seer in this case because we're taking so many Wraithlords. If I was only taking one Wraithlord, I would not take a Spirit Seer. But we have 3, and I think the Spirit Seer can bring enough value and have some utility that she can actually do some work. And so, for example, we can have the Spirit Seer doing mission actions, but can also be handing out sustained hits to one of the Wraithlords. As the Wraithlords take damage, could be healing the Wraithlords. As things approach the Wraithlords, we can be doing Isha's Fury. If we need to do behind enemy lines, we can just pick her up with a small base, set her in the opponent's deployment zone, maybe do establish locus. It all depends on the timing and the situation, but the Spirit Seer gives us some of the flexibility that the Warlock does on foot. The Warlock on foot would, but is able to do other things and shores up a few of the weaknesses of the Warlock. So as we keep it near the Wraithlords, or at least close enough to get lone op, it makes it so that we're not so vulnerable to indirect. And so, yeah, the Spirit Seer is interesting. It's something that I don't think you have to take. I just think it's kind of a fun thing to do. It's a psyker, and it will help the Wraithlords. And so if we're focusing on the Wraithlords, I think it's worth a try. Now, you can always drop the Spirit Seer for other things, and I think that's completely viable and understandable for a competitive list. But I think this is one of the few times where Spirit Seer could actually be used. Now, when it comes to strengths, obviously we're kind of focusing on some more durability. We have the Wraithlords and also Shroud Runners. I don't know if many people realize how valuable Shroud Runners are when it comes to durability in Eldar. And if you look at the cost of Shroud Runners being 80 points, they're cheaper than most of our Aspect Warriors, but they actually have 9 wounds, which is a significant, I mean, it's a 50% boost if you think about it in one sense, compared to most of our Aspect Warriors that only have 6 wounds. And so they're cheaper with a 50% boost in wounds, and they're tougher. They're toughness 4. They have stealth. They, still have an invuln save when being shot at. And so they can be quite difficult to kill in comparison to a lot of our other units. And so the Shroud Runners actually have kind of an interesting durability aspect to them that I think a lot of people kind of overlook, because it's not that they're super durable, but for the points, they're quite durable for Eldar, and they still have the speed. They're super fast. So, and really, their damage output isn't terrible either. But the main reason we're bringing Shroud Runners is because we can give ignore cover to most everything on this list for sure, but we can't for the Wraithlords. And when you get Bright Lances that are ignoring cover, they feel so much better. And really, we're looking at some combo synergy here again. We're going to have a Psyker near a Wraithlord, so they're going to be hitting on 3s. Ideally, we'll have the Farseer, Unshrouded Truth, tag a target for +1 to hit. Now we have Wraithlords. If they're shooting into their designated target, they're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, probably wounding on 3s, rerolling 1s to wound. Now we have a very, very consistent Bright Lance going into targets. And just to really push that to the next level, having the Shroud Runners give them ignores cover means that you're really putting that AP3 into that target. So even if they have a 2-up save, now you're making them save on 5s. If they have a 3-up save, they're only saving on 6s. And it makes the Bright Lances feel not only reliable because you're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, but also when you do get that hit in and send that wound to the opponent, it's going to be a lot harder for them to save. And now with the changes of Armor Contempt, like they might be able to Armor Contempt one of your Wraithlords, but they can't do all three now. So they're only going to be able to do it to the one, probably the one that you give sustained hits to, but they are not going to be able to do it to all of them. And so it can really make a very big difference and makes the Wraithlords feel so much better into some of those heavier targets. And then the Wraithlords are also very flexible. So we can pick what they're good into. And even if you don't pick something and it gets to you and you fight it in melee, or you come up, shoot it and fight it. I mean, you have the flamethrowers for light infantry. You have bright lances for tougher, better save things. The melee with the Ghost Glaive is pretty decent. The Wraithlord's one of our best just all-around units, and for its cost, it's also one of our toughest, and so it does bring a lot of value, and I think it's pretty fun to run these now, and I'm so glad that they're actually something that's fun to run, as opposed to in the index they were a bit overcosted, and hitting on 4s never felt good. So definitely try them out. And you'll kind of see that this list has a lot of efficient damage. So most every unit in this list, when shooting its preferred targets, is going to be very efficient at getting damage out. Most everything that's shooting is going to be efficient within 2 turns or less. And if you look at their shooting plus melee, a lot of times it can even get close to even getting their value in just 1 turn into a lot of different targets. And so there's a lot of efficiency when it comes to damage here, and there's no necessarily like massive combos that you just have to pull off, just ones that are super nice, and like mainly the ones I said there. I mean, the Farseers +1 to hit is just helpful to Dark Reapers, to the Wraithlords, and even to an extent the Shroud Runners, and so that just really boost several units. And then the Shroud Runners themselves can also help boost some units by ignoring cover, and then maybe you don't have to spend the stratagem, or you can make them something ignore cover over here, and then use a stratagem to ignore cover in a different place, and then you still have your Warp Spiders and Dark Reapers ignoring cover anyways. So a lot of ignores cover, and it is all kind of working together to try to do a lot of damage, really. Now, the weakness of this is obviously going to be if your opponent brings a lot of heavy anti-tank. Now, it feels really nice if your opponent only brings a couple heavy anti-tank weapons, and Seer Council is very good at eliminating targets, and so you may keep your Wraithlords back for turn 1 and maybe even turn 2 as you take out your opponent's big gun or big guns that could be killing the Wraithlords, as long as they don't have too many, and then your Wraithlords can kind of just dominate the board at that point. And so if you can focus those anti-tank guns down and you still have 2 Wraithlords left, your opponent may have a major struggle dealing with them. And while they are slow, they're not so slow that they can't be getting around the board, and they don't mind charging in and onto points. So very, very fun units. But if they do have a lot, it is going to be a weakness. And the other aspect about this list, when you compare it to pretty much all the others, is the list has less mobility and therefore less ability to shift and focus on different parts of the board. Now, it's nice that the Wraithlord's Bright Lances can shoot pretty far, and so it's not completely out there, but it definitely doesn't have the speed and mobility and ability to just like focus exactly where it needs to as some of the previous lists. And so this is going to feel quite different. The style is going to feel a lot different, but if you just take those 3 Wraithlords, and one plan that you can do into a lot of factions is take those 3 Wraithlords and put them on your expansion objective, and basically make it so that your opponent has to deal with that amount of toughness, and that amount of tank is going to be pretty tough, and they're going to be good at most things that are coming their way, especially with even just a little bit of backup. So try it out, get those Wraithlords on the board. Don't think that you have to spread them out and put them on all corners of the board. Like, don't be afraid to almost run them like a unit, like run them together, get them on an objective, and hold an objective strong with all 3 of them. And I think you'll be surprised at how effective that can be, especially into certain factions. And so, yeah, that's the Wraithlord Anchor. And now we're on to the last one, the balanced list. And this is balanced, obviously not in like infantry, mounted monsters, whatever. Balanced into what I think a list that is able to take on most anything that shows up on the table across from you. So we have Eldrad, Fuegan, Lycus, Janezar, a Troop Master, Farseer with Torque, Storm Guardian, Guardian Defender, 2x5 Reapers, 5 Dragons, 2x5 Banshees, 5 Rangers, 5 Troop, 4 Warlock Conclave, 2 Warlock Conclave, 2x5 Warp Spiders, and 2 Warlock Skyrunners individual. So breakdown, we got 16 profile and 13 units, so we did come in right at that 13 unit mark. We have a lot of infantry, and in fact we have only infantry outside of the Star Weaver and the Sky Runners. And so we're very much infantry skewed. We have great scoring. I would say it's very strong between the Rangers and the Sky Runners and the Warp Spiders. The Skyweaver can also be used. And so we have plenty of ways to score our secondaries and even to a certain extent have a nice counterpunch for the primaries. And so when we look at the synergy here, we have a lot of the synergies that we had before with Eldrad doing Doom. We have the Farseer getting +1 to hit. We have both Guardian Bricks, which I think are fantastic. Very good into a lot of different targets. We have Reapers that can be getting lines on different firing lines far across the board. We have Fuegan with the Fire Dragons to deal with some heavies. We got a couple sets of Howling Banshees, one going with Janezar to absolutely just show up when we need it. And then with this one, as you can tell, one of the main changes is this Troop Master with Troop and a Star Weaver. And the reason that I believe this is a good balance is because when you look at a lot of our other units, and a lot of these units are ones that you'll see, Tim Lowe's, James Kelling also ran, because the Phoenix Lords actually do really well in Seer Council. And so I think you'll see them commonly in a lot of Seer Council lists. But the Troop Master and Troop with a Star Weaver bring a really interesting flex piece and a great counterpunch to our opponents trying to take primary. And so I think I'm going to maybe even do an example video at some point of just showing how to kind of use a Troop Master and Troop with a Star Weaver, kind of a basic how-to. But one thing that you can think about them as, like, it doesn't really matter what your opponent puts on an objective. The Troop Master and Troop are going to hurt it really bad. It's one of the units that we have that is, again, literally good into basically every single unit in the game, with very few exceptions. The amount of dev wounds that Troop Master and Troop put out is just wild. You have effectively, I think it's 30 attacks or over 30 attacks that you're sending their way if you can get the +1 to hit with the Farseer. Now you're getting so many opportunities with those wound rolls to get dev wounds. The Troop Master does 2 damage, so his dev wounds really hit hard. He's rerolling 1s. The whole unit's getting +1 to wound, so even if they don't get dev wounds, they still all have AP on their melee weapons, and so they're going to be doing some chip damage to most everything. Their pistols are actually awesome now. The Nero pistols feel great. Fusion pistols feel amazing. The upgraded to those pistols really made a difference. And if you drop out a troop squad, move them up, throw grenades, shoot pistols, charge and fight, you are going to be hurting whatever it is that they run into. And on the hit back, if you didn't kill it, you can make your troop -1 to hit. But ideally, you're killing whatever they charge into that first time, getting back in the Star Weaver, and then making that a difficult issue for your opponent. They're going to have to put a lot of work to kill that Star Weaver, especially if you pop smoke. And then your troop comes out, and if you can get another kill the next turn, then now you're really getting a lot of value out of that 160 point troop unit. And so I think the troop unit is just a really nice flex piece. It's one of my favorites because as I mentioned in my tier videos, you can have Shining Spears, you have Wraithlords, and you have the Troop Master with Troop. Those are 3 very flexible units that all can kind of just be sent into almost whatever your opponent might skew into. But I'd say that my overall favorite is probably the Troop Master with Troop. They just really do flex into pretty much everything. They're fast, and even though they don't really synergize with the detachment, they do fill some holes in the list and just allow us to really clean up and counterpunch the opponent anytime they try to stick anything onto the objectives. So I highly recommend trying them out. So this list I think has as a strength, it's infantry skew, which means your opponent has to have enough volume of fire to deal with them. And we have an answer to basically any unit in the game. Anything that they show up with, between the stuff that we brought, we're going to be able to handle it with our +1 to hit, +1 to wound, dev wounds. We've got Isha's Fury, grenades. We have all sorts of ways to deal with all sorts of targets. And so I think that is a pretty neat part of this list. Now, weaknesses. I think this list could possibly get overwhelmed by vehicles or really high toughness and save units, because we do only have 1 set of fire dragons with Fuegan. And even though we have 2 sets of Dark Reapers, they're not the most consistent into the high toughness targets. There's no doubt that Eldrad's +1 to wound helps, and the Farseer's +1 to hit can make a very big difference. But we also have to make up some of that difference with the Troop Master and Troop. And yes, they can destroy vehicles, especially with, again, grenade, fusion pistols, and melt to range, charging, fighting with a bunch of dev wounds. They can absolutely shred some vehicles. But again, if you kill 1 vehicle with Fuegan and you kill 1 vehicle with the Troop and Troop Master, and then they end up on the hit back killing Fuegan and the Fire Dragons and killing the Troop Master squad, well, now you're really stuck if they have a bunch of vehicles left. And so there is a possibility that this list gets overwhelmed by vehicles. It's not happened to me. I've run a list similar to this a lot, and I have not run though into a just like pure vehicle skew list. I have run into knights and did just fine, so that's probably the closest, but I haven't run into, I don't remember even what detachment it is, one of the Space Marine detachments where they take a whole bunch of vehicles. That is one that I have not run into, and so I don't know exactly kind of how that runs, but I do know that into knights, this list felt just fine. So yeah, this is the balanced list, and this is kind of one that I have been running, or at least been running something very similar to this, not exactly this, and sometimes I do drop the Troop Master and Troop and Star Weaver so that I can try out other units, but this is a great foundation and a good starting point. And I think learning how to use the Troop Master and Troop is just a great thing to be able to do anyways. And as a finesse unit, there's a lot of tricks you can do with it. The 6-inch pylon and consolidate is interesting. All the different options you can do with the Troop and Troop Master. Very cool unit. They all look cool. They're fast. They're small and base size. And so like there's just a lot of neat things about the Harlequins. And they're just one of my favorite models and units for Eldar. So yeah, I think the balance list brings a lot to the table. I hope you give it a try, and if you do, or give a list to try that's similar, let me know in the comments. And again, let me know what your favorite lists are, and I would love to get some feedback on what people are thinking about these lists and their own ideas on how they think they could use one of these lists. Well, thank you so much for listening through this video. I hope it was beneficial for you. I really am trying my best to bring value to those who watch these videos and help players new and experienced get into Seer Council and hit the ground running. As far as my current list, what I'm going to do, like I said, I kind of run a list near balance, but what I'm going to do is have an updated one on Patreon and for members. And this is just so that I can keep it up to date, because I'm sure we're going to have some balance with the points in the near future. and possibly even some rule changes on things, and who knows what they're going to do with Yunari, or if they're going to really hit Eldar as a whole really hard. Whatever ends up happening, this list will change, and so this video will become semi out of date as soon as there's major point updates. And so what I would like to do is just have a list that I pretty much update probably once a week, and that will just be the current meta list as I am using it in Patreon. And so if you'd like to be a member and stay up to date with that, I would greatly appreciate it and support the channel. And so you can check that out. I'm going to be setting up a Discord, I believe, in the near future. It's not set up yet. When that happens, I will definitely let you know. And I would love to have some open discussion revolving around the meta list and like what the most competitive build would be for Seer Council as a consensus. And I think this is something that's going to kind of evolve over time, and that's why I kind of wanted to, for my current list, to have something that actually is staying up to date. So let me know what you think of this, and I would love to share that with people and have them take a look at it and have some discussion around that throughout the next several months as we get into more and more other factions getting their codexes as well. And so that's kind of the plan. Another thing that I've kind of started doing, I've had some requests for coaching. I'm probably going to be putting some coaching videos up in the near future of some of the coaching I've done, just so you can get an idea of kind of how I do it. And if you're interested, just let me know in the comments. And as I set up that Discord, I'm also going to be trying to make it a little easier for people to access. And if you would like some coaching on how to play Seer Council, that's kind of what I've been focusing on. And so a lot of people have asked me about doing some coaching. I would love to help you out and do, 2-hour, 3-hour little session on really, again, hitting the ground running, getting ready for some competitive. If you have a tournament coming up and you want to get some ideas on either the list, and if you know what you might be running into, making some plans, would love to help you out with that. So just let me know, and be looking out for some of the coaching videos that will be coming out in the future. And we'll get more into that as we continue to grow this channel. And I really appreciate all the feedback so far from the videos. It's been awesome seeing a lot of the comments and the positive comments on the videos. And I hope that I can continue to bring you guys lots of value. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.